Hello and welcome to the Homeschool Conference 2013. We're really glad that you're here listening in on the studio audience, and we're also glad that we get a chance to share ideas, and I'm just really grateful to be here. My name is Joey Sabol, and I'm going to be presenting on how to engage math students in an online community. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to be sharing the slideshow with everyone who's participating now and also virtually, asynchronously. And I'll be sending and sharing with you a link that will take you to a Google Doc, and you can go to see that presentation and go back and forth in my presentation and see different things as much as you would like to. So if you at any time have a question, you can go ahead and click on the place on Blackboard where you can raise your hand, and as soon as I get a chance, I'll let you ask a question. But otherwise, I'm just going to go through my presentation here and talk all the way through, and I'll have the time for questions at the end. If there's something that you'd like to talk to me afterwards or at any time, feel free to contact me through my email address, jsabolcbu@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Twitter. So for my presentation, I'd like to talk about what it means to engage students and how learning math can be a challenge and how we can overcome that by connecting with others through online communities. Before I get started, I do want to share a little bit about myself. I'm a homeschooled dad, and I have two boys, ages 12 and 7, and I've been homeschooling them for the past 5 years. My wife and I decided to homeschool 5 years ago, and my wife is an architect, and she works during the day for a firm designing schools and other public places, and she helps the boys out with Spanish and art, because those are two things that I just can't do very well. And I take care of all the other things with my boys. I love being with my boys, and I know not everybody can homeschool, but I'm grateful to be in this position to do that. Besides being a homeschool dad, I'm an adjunct professor. I teach college algebra at a local university in Riverside, California. And I also have taught middle school math for 13 years. My favorite subject that I love to teach in math is algebra, and I've been teaching that for over 20 years. Recently, I started my doctoral program at Pepperdine University in learning technologies, and I've been learning a lot of theory that goes behind how people learn, and I'm very excited and passionate about that program and being able to participate in that opportunity. All right, so I want to also tell you about one of the things that I'm famous for, and that's the quadratic formula. Now, I didn't come up with the quadratic formula, but this formula is one of the most famous of all formulas in algebra, and I have a song that I teach my students to sing, and they may not know how to use the quadratic formula by singing the song, but once they hear it, they remember it. One of the things about songs is you have that tune in your head and you just can't get it out. So, and I know this song goes to many different tunes, the quadratic formula. I've heard it go to Pop Goes the Weasel and Gilligan's Island, but this song that I sing to my students is extra special, and it's been around for several hundred years. It goes like this. Negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then when I teach it to my students, we sing it over and over again, and they memorize it very quickly. One of the neat things I like about that particular jingle is it goes in a round, kind of like row, row, row your boat. So I can have half of the class sing it, and then the other half will join in later, and we march around the school, or we do different things as we're singing the song. We get up and stomp our feet and clap our hands and do some dancing. So we memorize the quadratic formula that way. Now, besides teaching songs, I also like to tell stories. And the quadratic formula also can be retold as a story about this fellow named Bob. Now Bob, he spells his name forwards and backwards the same, and that negative sign in front of the B is talking about Bob. Now whenever Bob, that's B, tries to do something, it always turns out the opposite of how he wants it to be. So if he's trying to swim, he sinks. He doesn't bob, he sinks. Sometimes he tries to say yes, but it just comes out no. And sometimes he tries to do something really fancy, but it just comes out like he's a nerd. Well, Bob, this opposite of Bob, this negative B, is deciding, should he go to a party? Should he go? That's the plus. Or should he not? That's the minus. Should he go? Should he not? Should he go? Free food. He shouldn't go. It's all rotten food. Should he go to the party? There's going to be lots of cool people there. Oh, he shouldn't, because his parents are chaperoning and he'd be embarrassed. Well, that plus or minus means that there's two answers to the quadratic formula for finding out what the value of x is. So Bob, he decides to go to the party, and that's this radical party, this square root. And the square root is the house where the party is, and inside there's music, and he be square dancing. He be squared. So this symbol inside the square root sign is b to the second power, or b squared. So he be square dancing. Now when Bob is dancing, no one wants to dance with him, and he looks kind of dorky. And so he stops dancing, and he goes to the next room in the party, and they're playing a game in that next party. He decides to play. Now, this game is a game of poker with cards. And do you think Bob wins, or do you think Bob loses? Well, Bob loses this poker game, and that's the minus sign, or the subtraction sign. And the person he's playing poker with, who wins the hand for poker, has 4 aces, 4 AC, 4 aces. So he be square dancing, he loses cards for poker with 4 aces, and then the party's all over. See, this is a fraction, and the party is all over really late at night. It's 2A. And so you don't say the M in the formula. So I like to teach stories, and I like to teach songs as a way of connecting and engaging students with algebra, and I also like them to draw pictures and to make up their own stories and their own songs and their own ways of remembering things to help make that connection. So it becomes something that they own rather than something that I gave them. I don't come up with songs or stories for every formula, but I challenge my students to come up with some, and then I get to share those with other students later on. And I also get to share them with my boys. The ringtone on my cell phone when my phone rings is the quadratic formula song, and my boys know the quadratic formula, even though they're not ready for algebra and solving quadratic formulas yet. Now, I want to talk about how to engage students. How do we get them involved? Now, this list that I'm going to be giving is not an exhaustive list. There's other things that will definitely work. But I want to talk about some of the things that just come to mind, at least for me as an educator and teaching middle school and college for the last 20 years. And one of the ways that I motivate my students and get them to get involved in learning is I sometimes have extrinsic rewards, or some kind of a motivation that is not inside them but comes from outside. So sometimes they might be interested in earning a reward and saying, if I do this work for Mr. Sabol, if I want to learn from my parents, I get some kind of a reward. I get to have some free time in the afternoon, maybe playing a video game, or maybe if I get really good grades, I'm going to get some money for that A. So that's the motivation that some students and some teachers provide for their learners and say, hey, do this work and you'll get this for it. You'll get some kind of a commission. You sweat, you work, you concentrate, you show me that you're trying to learn, and then I'll reward you. Another way of motivating students to learn is the opposite of that, and actually long-term it works out better because those extrinsic rewards, if you're not offering them, they don't really, the students don't really want to learn, or they don't feel like it's worth it for them. They're entitled to get something and you're not giving it to them anymore. The other kind of motivation that comes from within takes longer to develop, but it also stays with the student, sometimes for a lifetime. And I really like this quote from Abraham Lincoln. He said, "I will study and work hard, and someday my chance will come." And that's how I kind of think about intrinsic motivation and intrinsic rewards. And this little graphic that I have up here is, you know, eat your vegetables. You know it's good for you. And if you do those things long term, you're going to live a happy and a healthy life for the most part. So if you stay in school, or if you pay attention to your parents and you learn from the opportunities and the relationships you have in life, you're going to be much better off. You're going to be a better citizen. You're going to be being able to get a job. You're going to be making intelligent decisions. And overall, you're going to have that payoff someday of saying, I did all this stuff. I had to wait for it. I have this gratification that gets to be rewarded later, but it's much better. And it never goes away. It's something that's inside, and it can't be taken away. Now, I also like to engage my students by giving them material in math that's relevant to them, something that they're interested in. Now, this requires that as a teacher or as a parent, I know my students. I know the things that they like to listen to. I know the things that they're involved with besides being in my classroom or besides being on page 42 and working on these problems. And so I like to find out, do they like to listen to some kind of music, or are they interested in some sports? Do they like to go shopping? And what kinds of things do they want to do when they grow up? And I want to connect that material that I'm giving them with things that they're interested in and in everyday life situations, because that helps them to say, I need to know this for me, not because my dad or my mom wants me to, or not because my teacher or my friends want me to learn this, but because it's going to have that value to me as a learner. And so as I look at different kinds of examples and situations that the students are interested in, I get to come up with a rich resources that are more than just supplemental that the textbook gives, or maybe a website that says, hey, do these things and then your students will be really good with math. I get to find out tailor-made what works for my kids. And as a homeschool dad, this is one of the reasons why I homeschooled. I get to work one-on-one with my kids. And I get to basically go through and find out what are they good at, and I get to tailor-make this so that it's perfectly fit for their learning styles and for their interests, so they can do the best that they can do, and I can guide them into becoming more mature as learners and as people. Now, another way to engage students is to give them something that is doable. Give them a job. Give them a task. And I know a lot of teachers, a lot of parents expect this to happen even if there's no learning going on. They want to see some activity. They want to see some evidence that the students are paying attention, that the students are in an environment where learning could happen. And so things that might fill in this category would be taking notes and working on worksheets and having lots of homework and having a book and turning to a certain page and looking at it. And there's lots of problems there, and there's pictures, and there's advice, and there's a link that says, go to this website, maybe the Khan Academy, and watch this movie. And I think those are all great things to engage the students, because when you give them a task, they will, many times, be learning. But that doesn't always necessarily guarantee that learning is going on. You can lead somebody who is thirsty to a place where there's some good water to drink, but that doesn't mean that they're going to actually take advantage of those situations. But having some kind of a way to engage the students at their level so that they begin to produce some work of their own is the goal. And sometimes we have to have a ramp where we start at a certain lower spot and pull them up to the place where they need to be. And sometimes that ramp is some task-oriented kind of activity that we give them. And one of the things that I really like from a Greek philosopher was Quintilian. He said, the job of the teacher is to arrange victories for the student. And I really like that the job of the teacher is to find out how they can help the student be successful. And many times, it's finding the right activities to not necessarily trick the students, but to help them to make that transition from being a passive learner to being an active one. And that's what I really like to focus on as an educator is to engage the students with wherever they're at and to bring them up to another level where I think they should be. All right, so that's kind of where we're at with how I feel about engaging the students. Now, the title of my talk is Engaging Math Students in an Online Community. So the next thing I want to talk about is how learning math can be a challenge. Now, not just in a traditional classroom or not just in a place where we think, oh, this is what math is like and how it should be taught, but also in a distance kind of a learning course. Or maybe all of us are thinking about homeschool for this conference, and we're not going to be in a class of 30 or 40 or 50, and we're not going to be thinking about the traditional ways, but even in those situations, learning math can be a challenge. And here's some of the reasons why, and there may be others. Math is a language. It's not necessarily something you can study and say, hey, I've crammed for this and I'm ready for the test tomorrow. It's a language, and it needs to be practiced as a language or acquired as a language. And sometimes there can be gaps. There can be places where the learners are not quite getting hold of things and they're not able to proceed because they're not fluent enough. And sometimes with language, what comes out first is being able to hear things and understand things, but getting them out and sharing them with other people is another story. And that vocal part and putting it in your own words, that takes time. So math is one of those things where you could be listening or watching somebody else do it and you can say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or I think I could do that. And then later on your own, you might discover, wait a minute, how do I do that? So it's a language, and it's unlike some other topics that are taught in school or at home, because it takes a while to acquire. And failing and making mistakes is a big part of that process. And so as a teacher and as a parent, I want to encourage my students, my boys, and my kids to make mistakes and learn from them. And sometimes making mistakes is awkward or embarrassing. But I think in life, making mistakes is how all of us learn. My boys are part of a chess club, and I tell them every time they play someone else, they could win or they could lose, but they have an opportunity to learn how to be a better chess player by playing against somebody else, or even the same person they've already played. And that opportunity is there if they win or lose. It doesn't matter. They can still become a better player for chess. And in math, it's really easy to make one tiny little mistake and get the answer completely wrong, and to focus on how you got the wrong answer. But algebra and math is a process, and it's about logic, and it's about following a certain number of steps, and you could get most of it right and get the problem completely wrong. And I think a lot of people, a lot of educators, a lot of students, a lot of people in the general public just think, well, I'm just not good at math. I can't seem to get the answer. And part of that is that we're afraid to fail, or we don't want others to know that we're struggling. And so a big part of engaging students in learning math is to create a safe environment to make mistakes and to fail forwards as we make mistakes, and to look at mistakes that other people have made, and sometimes I do this on purpose. I'll show a math problem that I've done and how I've got the wrong answer, and I show each step, and I ask my students, or I ask my boys, I say, what did I do wrong? And that error analysis, where you look at what went wrong and try to analyze, oh, right over there you added 2 plus 5, and when you added you got 10. Oh, what's wrong with that? Or what can we do better? And so trying to fix those mistakes is a very powerful tool to engage students. And I believe that if you empower the students to learn from making mistakes, then they have a different attitude about learning new things. So failing is definitely a part of the process. You know, and as we grow older, it gets tougher. When we were younger, you know, learning how to walk, learning how to use the toilet, you know, we failed all the time. But we didn't give up. We kept on trying. We kept on seeing our parents encourage us and saying, yeah, come to mommy, come to daddy, or no problem, I'll clean up that mess. Let's put another diaper on you. We'll try another month to see if we can, you know, potty train you. And we get this idea that when kids get older, or even adults, as we get older, we're not supposed to fail as much. And I think that's a mistake in itself, is to expect that our failing is a bad thing. Now, if we're not learning from our mistakes, that's one thing. But to imagine that we're just going to pick this up and all of a sudden everything's going to make sense without some kind of a struggle, I think is some faulty thinking. And there are some people that just naturally learn things faster than others, but as individuals, we're special, and we can't compare our kids to each other because they have different kinds of styles and personalities. And so I think it's really important to give our students, to give our kids the freedom to make mistakes and to learn from it. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up here is how in math, sometimes there's more than one way to solve a problem. Not always, but many times there are. And I know that in other countries besides the United States, these different strategies are actually celebrated. In some classrooms, the teacher goes around and looks at all of the students as they're working quietly on a problem, and he selects someone to go up to the board and write down their solution. He picks another student to go up and put their solution, and they're different. And across the board, whether it's a chalkboard or a whiteboard or whatever, there's different ways of solving math problems. And the students get to look at all of the different ways that their peers, their classmates, solve those problems. And the teacher talks about them with the class and say, you know, this one was very elegant, or this one was very complicated, but they still got the same answer. And then the students get a chance to see that sometimes you can arrive at a solution differently than somebody else, and it's okay. And I like to tell my boys how if I needed to eat something, maybe some bread, I could go to a certain store to get some bread, and somebody else made it for me. Or I could go to a different grocery store. As long as I get the bread, that's the most important thing. I could even make the bread from scratch. And as long as I'm eating bread, I'm happy. And so as I engage and try to arrange victories for my students and my boys, I try to figure out and I have to do a little research here myself sometimes, is there another way to solve this problem than the book is saying or the way that I was taught that might be better for some students? And to say that everybody has to be just like me in solving a math problem is a little highfalutin and a little bit of saying, you know, my way or the highway. And there are other ways to succeed in solving math problems, sometimes with the strategy that you pick. And sometimes different students can do it with less work shown. They are able to just look at things and say, I know what the answer is, I'm not sure why, but I know what the answer is. And that should be celebrated. And other times, some people like to show every single step, even more than really is needed. But hey, if that works for them, then that should be okay. We should be celebrating the logical thinking that our students are making, because really that's one of the goals of mathematics, is teaching logical thinking. Not necessarily always getting the right answer, but I have this thing that I'm trying to say, to communicate as a language, and logically I am building on this so that it's supported and it will withstand all of the pressures of life. It'll have that integrity. And so the logical thinking that I'm trying to transfer to my students is one of my major goals in engaging them with learning math. Everyone thinks all the time. And so that's one of the things that I try to impress upon my students is, I want you to learn this so you can think well. Now, as a doctoral student, I've been doing a lot of research on how people learn, how the brain works. And one of the things that's really impressed me is cognitive apprenticeship. Now, this applies to other things besides math. But the way that we learn is not an isolated kind of an event. We learn from being around other people. We watch them do things. We mimic and copy them. We have people that encourage us. We also have people that say, oh, you can't do it yet. Let me help you a little bit. Kind of like somebody who's lifting weights and they can't quite lift it, and we have somebody come along with 2 fingers, and we call them a spotter, and they barely help that person along, lift the weights the rest of the way. That's actually when most of the muscle is being grown in weightlifters, is when that person scaffolds or comes alongside and just assists just a little bit with just how much they need. They don't lift all of the weight for them, but they just help a little bit. So that's called scaffolding. And we also learn by telling other people what we're doing and what we're learning. We share it with other people. We have show and tell, and we say, hey mom, hey dad, this is what I learned today. And as we put that into our own words, there's parts of our brain that have these connections going along that help us to really understand in a deeper way what we're learning. So that articulation has to happen in community. We have to be sharing it with people. And as we talk about things, we also think about them. And we are sometimes challenged by other people. They say, well, do you really mean that? Or I thought about this instead. Or I have a question about that. And that causes the learner to reflect and really understand, what do they really know? Now, as teachers who teach things over and over again, we really know our subject matter well. Because when you teach it to somebody else, you have to put it in words that other people can understand. There's that old saying that if you listen to something, you forget 90% by the next day. You only learn 10%. And if you take notes and you write things down, you'll remember about 30%, forget 70% soon. But if you write notes and you look at them and you study them and you go over them again, then you retain and you remember things much better. It's like having a photograph and looking at it, and that reminds you of those things that happened in that picture from a long time ago. But when you teach someone else, then you really know something well. And cognitive apprenticeship is about the relationship between a tutor or someone who's trying to learn something as an apprentice and someone who's a master, someone who's a mentor. And they help people with learning things in the cognitive sense. So it's not necessarily, picking up a skill like I know how to make a horseshoe, or I know how to make a wooden table, but it's about learning things. And in schools or in our homes, we have this cognitive apprenticeship happening all the time. Now, some of us have situations in our home, students and kids that we're around and have relationship with, and they have no problems learning math. But they still do need to be in relationship with other people. And if you find an online community where you can connect to and engage with, that'll make that student who's really good at math, who doesn't need really any support, that'll make them even much better at what they're doing. They can help other people, and they can become a mentor. They can become someone who is an expert, and they can share their ideas. It just helps them even more. Now, this talk, this presentation that I'm giving right now is mostly geared for families where they have someone in their family, a son or a daughter, or someone that they're helping out in a homeschool situation where that person needs support. They're not getting it. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to be in a healthy community. And I want to encourage everyone to engage and to find and to search and to explore, to find some places in the homeschool network that you're involved with, to find some other students that are maybe studying the same topic. Maybe they're using the same textbook or resources that you are, and join them in an online sense. And we have a great opportunity with the internet to connect with other people if it's a safe place. And there may be some environments that have already been established, or it could be that you get to start one and advertise and to announce to everyone that you have this community where this kind of cognitive apprenticeship is going to be happening, where other people can join in and have conversation with, because collectively we're much better than we are alone and isolated. Now, online communities can also help because learning in context, learning by the situation that you're in, learning by real-life situations helps motivate that intrinsic motivation, those rewards, because you realize, I need to learn this. And we learn by doing things. And if you put that in the context of something that people are interested in, or something that that the student can say, I value this, then that's much better. And being connected to online communities can really help this, because besides being in your house, they can also interrelate and find others that share common interests with them besides you. And this really does help. Instead of mom said this or dad said this, I've got to do this, they'll realize that other people are in the same situation as they are, and they're learning about math, maybe possibly in some other real-life situations, and they'll say, oh, I'm interested in that. And they'll have those conversations there, and they'll develop those social and communication skills along the way in addition to learning math. Now, in my research, I've been finding out that knowledge is really a partnership, that we need other people to watch. We look outside of us, and then we internalize it, and then once it's inside of us, we need to have some way of producing it to show that we really know the material. And so this co-construction process can be done in an online community. in a context that has value and interest to the learner. I really am excited and passionate about using the resources that I have around my environment. I have different tools to teach math with. I have pencils and I have paper and I use crayons and I use pens, but I also look around when I'm engaging my students and engaging my kids at anything that's around me in my environment, and I try to make a math lesson out of it. When they were younger, we would count helicopters that flew by, or how many trains we could hear during the day, or we'd count birds, and we would write in chalk on the sidewalk, and we do tally marks, and we do all sorts of math, and we do adding and subtracting. And math is all around us. And if we are able to share the internet and the connections that we have there in a safe way, so that our kids are safe, there are a lot of great places that we could have access to. Even if it's not at home, it could be somewhere else. It might be at a library. Or it could be that we're not going to use an actual physical computer, but we're going to have some kind of a handheld device, maybe a mobile phone or a tablet of some sort. Well, we can connect with a homeschool network. We could have a Google Hangout. We could post something on YouTube. We could be connecting with people that have common interests or are studying the same kind of subject, and we could make it safe for our kids. We could have it so that it would not be shared with everyone on the network of the internet, of the World Wide Web. We can make things private. We can have private groups. We can go on social networks, and we can have affinity groups. And we can just have it so it's a closed group, so not everyone can join. And that way, our kids can share their ideas, they can write them out, they can listen to what other people are saying, and we can network with people that are not just in our local physical location neighborhood, up and down the street, or in the particular city or farm community that we live in, but anywhere in the world. So that's a powerful thing to have access to. Another idea that I'd like to just throw out there for all of the people that are listening is starting a blog or a journal. And when you have a web blog, you empower your students to have a voice. And as they write about math and share the things that they're learning or what they're struggling with, that really helps with the articulation, that helps them to voice what it is that they are discovering, and it helps put what they're doing in their own words. As they internalize and hear from you or from wherever they're learning the math from, they get to produce something on their own. And one of those ways is where they can share it with other people, and maybe they're going to have other family members follow them and see what they're doing. Maybe they have family that lives out of the country or out of state, and they could be looking and reading their blogs, and they can be making comments. Another idea that I have besides writing blogs is to create a discussion board or have some forums where students can interact with each other and post pictures, or they can ask questions, and then other people who are in the group might be able to have answers and write back to them, or take a picture of what they did and send it back. And those things are discussion boards or forums. And I use these a lot when I teach at the university level, and I have a learning management system that actually costs a lot of money. But as a homeschooler, I also know that there's some resources out there that are free on the internet that you can have blogs and discussion boards and forums where people can gather that are relatively inexpensive or absolutely free. And I'd love to share those with you if you want to send me an email. I know that sometimes I offer suggestions, and then the next week I find out that that particular website is down or that company went out of business and it's no longer there. But right now I'm currently using Edmodo, and you can make a classroom. You can invite students to be in your class. You don't have to be a classroom teacher. You could be a homeschool teacher. And you can send this link out to other people, other families that you're connected to, and they can join the class. And then you can have discussions where students can upload pictures of their math work and do like a show and tell kind of a thing. It's almost like going up to the blackboard in a way, or the whiteboard, and using your chalk or your pen and showing other people in the class what you've been doing and where you might need some help. And sometimes I've noticed that students don't engage in math because they don't know how to ask for help. They are not sure what the first step is. And having it written out like this really lowers the hurdle a lot to help them to make a step towards asking for help. And they could just take a picture of the math problem and say, I need help. Or they could say, I keep on getting the wrong answer. And just putting it out there for other people to respond to. And it could be that some other parents or some other people that are in the group as peers or colleagues, fellow students, they might be able to offer some ideas to help out. And I really like the idea of students making their own movies, of students drawing pictures and having photos and singing songs and telling stories in their videos about their math problems. And so I like using multimedia to help the students engage in learning math. Anything that's a novelty, anything that's brand new and state-of-the-art, you might not have access to. But the students, when they do those things, they like doing it because it's a novelty. It's something that, it's a privilege. It's something that they get to take pride in and say, I did this, I made this. And as they get better at doing that, they get better at engaging in learning the math and taking more steps, at taking risks and learning how to fail and offering up constructive criticism when somebody else posts a video or a photo and to analyze it and say, I really like this part here. Here's what I got the same answer, but I did it this way. And that sharing of information, that collaborating, that communicating with other people in community is something that I think is really important to engaging students in learning math. I really want to thank you for participating and being here with me. And I wanted to open it up for questions in case anybody had some questions. And of course, you can always contact me by emailing me at my email address, jsabolcbu@gmail.com.
Nice job, Joey.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so any other questions?
Sure. Question number 2 is related to the previous one about how to resolve problems when dealing with English language learners, if you will. And this has to do with ADA compliance and dealing with a disabled student who has physical and or cognitive disabilities. And if it's difficult enough to get a story problem across to the enabled student, let's say, then it's much more of a challenge. to get the same concepts, the same thought process are related to those with disabilities who can't see, can't hear, and have learning issues.
I think there's definitely a challenge there in giving the appropriate accommodations for each student. And using technology, we've come a long ways in helping some of those types of students and connecting them with other people in online communities is one way to kind of help with that. They don't actually have to be doing the things necessarily, but they can virtually see things, they can virtually hear things. They don't necessarily have to be on a field trip going to maybe a particular place, but they can go on the internet and they can go on a virtual tour. And so I think that there are some types of accommodations that can be done with technology that can help those students to bridge the gap, or some of the barriers that had been there for them. They can be lowered, or things that used to be up on the higher shelf can be brought down lower so they can reach them. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're not going to have struggles or they're going to all of a sudden learn things just because they're in an online community where they can share ideas. But it does help. And I think the more tools that you have in your toolbox, the better. I think if you only have a hammer, and every time you have a job come along, you say, oh, I've got to use my hammer on this one. Well, it sure would be nice to have some other things in your toolbox to help with those tasks. And so, being connected to maybe more than one online community, or not just relying on the internet to be the silver bullet, if we just had this, everything would be fine. Now, I don't believe that at all. I think it has to be appropriate, and as a parent who knows that I have a child with special needs, really, I think everyone has special needs. And the things that work for what I think some people consider like disabled students, what works for them works for everybody, because we all walk with a limp. We all have things that blind us and things that prevent us from growing. And it's difficult to overcome those things. And for some people it's just, I don't know if it's more obvious to recognize it, but some people hide or mask what their problems are better than others. But I do think that for looking at word problems and some of that that's traditionally there, those problems from real life, sometimes they're not in the right context. And I think the challenge for educators and parents is to find out what's best for my child, and how can I help them in a non-traditional way, because it really has to be made tailor-made just for my child and what their needs are, what their interests are. And like I was saying earlier in the session, math is all around us, and I look around everywhere to look for math. Sometimes I'll flick the light switch on and off, on and off, on and off, and I'll just start talking about that and using that with math. And if I'm driving in the car, I don't always share this with my boys, but sometimes I just say, hey, that reminds me of this math situation as we're driving along, and I have this little conversation with them, and then they ask lots of math questions back to me, sometimes things that I wasn't even anticipating. And I realize that they're really thinking about that math concept, just as we're driving along looking at road signs or license plates or something like that, like how many possible combinations of license plates could there be, or that kind of thing.
Oh, that's an excellent example of critical thinking right there.
All right, well, great. I appreciate that question. Both questions. The first question was, how do you correlate logical thinking with critical thinking in a story problem or a word problem? And that really does take a long time, a process. And I think in the United States especially, we really need to focus more than just skills and say, let's look at some deep levels of learning conceptually and go deep with this instead of going, an inch deep and a mile wide. so we really can understand how everything fits together, everything's connected. And I really like being able to homeschool my boys because when we study math, it's in history and it's in science that we're doing it. It's all connected. And that's really one of the keys of having that critical thinking and knowing what to do in a word problem or in real life is knowing how what I have as knowledge, how is it connected to solving that problem? And I think one of the great things about math is that it's all based on solving problems, and that's one of the best ways to engage people in learning is to present them with a problem. Here's the problem. How are we going to solve it?
Exactly.
So thank you. Good questions.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate you staying a little extra to respond to those questions. Like I said before, I wasn't quite sure when to throw them out on in the chat because I didn't want to interrupt your flow of your presentation. So that's why I appreciate you're taking the extra time to respond.
Sure, my pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for presenting for this conference. Are you presenting tomorrow too, or is this it for?
My family's going to be going on a trip tomorrow, so I'm not able to participate in the conference tomorrow. But this has been a really great privilege for me to be here, and I really appreciate talking with you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, I'm hoping that your boys will be able to perhaps watch or even listen if they have mobile devices No? Okay.
I was going to say next year I'm hoping that they'll have something to present.
Ah.
They'll be one of the presenters.
That was with their father, perhaps.
Yes, they'll have some good conversations.
A family affair. Absolutely. Wonderful. I'd certainly look forward to that. It's too bad we have to wait a whole year, though.
Well, maybe there'll be some other opportunities.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for helping me and for being here. It's been a great time. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Did you want to turn off the recording, or shall I?
I've got it. Thank you so much.